Good evening, audience, to our third Polaris podcast. Tonight we are, I, Sietse Bosman, will be your host, and Hans Vogel from Italy, and Charles Daly from I presume, sunny Texas. And today we are going to talk about the decay of truth, and we were inspired by a RAND Corporation report with the exact same name, The Decay of Truth. And it goes into why the public sphere is becoming more and more incapable of distinguishing fact from not fact and opinion. So which one of you guys wants to address this first and give your first remarks about the RAND report?
Charles?
I will if you like.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
please.
I made some notes here.
Mhm.
First of all, I think the primary thing that I noticed is that Rand claims to take the long view of history, but for them, it seems to refer primarily to 20th century institutions and forms of news distribution. But it also says there's a great volume of opinion over fact. But isn't that the general education of people, where you have the Bible or classical literature predominating for centuries over facts about the empirical world? And did that create a less stable society?
I think
Well,
that's a good question. Hans?
that's what I also occurred to me, that there was this allegedly historical vision, which rather limited. But the thing is, I think that truth, and I always like to go to the source on this, which is to me is Giambattista Vico, the Italian philosopher from the 18th century, who said, talking about sciences and the humanities, that the sciences establish what is a fact, what is true, lo certo, what is certain, lo certo, the certainty, and the humanities establish what is true. And this in itself, I think, is very interesting, a very good way to handle the topic, because it implies that truth, it has a political side to it, has a political aspect. And if you look at what is true, what is regarded as truth, it is almost always political. You have in Orwell the Ministry of Truth, and you have all these truths in Soviet Russia and in dictatorships. What is everything that the dictator says or the chief of the country says is true, and that used to be the case in monarchies as well. So truth has always been, in my opinion, a politicized or a political concept. And what is certain, that's why Aristotle said, I think, didn't he? So give me one fixed point, and I will lift the world by means of this fixed point. And so there are no fixed points, basically, and truths are always flexible, and there are very few truths. And if you look at sort of scientific or scholarly discussions, scholarly debate, truth is a flexible and an expanding or a contracting entity. It is not something that is always true. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong?
Well, you see, the report basically outlines this distinction that truth, what they consider truth, is that which is factual. Like how many people do have a driver's license in society? How many people have social security? How many people have health insurance? These things can be measured and quantified and researched and repeatable, basically. So this is to them for the scope of this research and this report, that is what they call truth. And the very premise of the report is that the let's say public discourse or the public at large seems more and more unable or even flat out rejects things that are factual. So there is very little trust in governments anymore, in government institutions or in government numbers or statistics. And in some cases it might be justified, but some cases it might not. One, for instance, is that a lot of people, and I would dare say the most of the inhabitants, at least in America, would say that crime is rising. But if you look at it statistically, crime has been falling for decades. And if many people will simply reject these facts when they are confronted with these facts, and digging in even harder in the beliefs that they already held. And that is basically what this report is about: is that it's not necessarily that the state is trying to impose a truth on people, but it is that the general public is more and more unable to discern between fact and opinion.
That's why I would need a better definition of what the alternative to truth is in the minds of the Rand Corporation writers. So where does myth fit in? Is myth fiction? Is myth non-fact? Or is that some other thing they don't want to address? Because I would say that myth is what has grounded most societies in human history, not facts. And that's what's shown to create stable societies, not just, what is the speed of light in a vacuum, or us all agreeing on that, I think this is wishful thinking. Again, they're generalizing to the history of the world in a way, whereas really they're just referring to the values of the last 150 years, maybe.
Well, could it be that because I'm not in any way defending the Rand Corporation, because they also say that faith in vaccine schedules is falling, and that is a bad thing. And I think it's very healthy to be skeptical about that. But I think in the past, when you had clergy, professing a religion to their congregation, at least they were considered experts, and the congregation accepted the word of the experts, basically. And what you now have is, at least what the report says, is that people think they are themselves experts without being masters of the matter. They do not understand. Let's say they vent their opinions without knowing exactly what they're talking about. And that is something that is very dangerous and very destructive. And that, I think, that's what the report is mainly about.
Mm-hmm. It's from 2018, right? Before the COVID show.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but I think truth is always relative. There are no, like what also Charles hinted at. There's very little truth, and it's not a modern thing. If you look at older history, as you said rightly, there's also not much of a sort of not much truth. There's a sort of the kind of truth that you need or truths that you need to be able to cultivate your vegetable garden, for instance, or to milk your cow, or to be a good husband, and not overstep the bounds, etc., etc. That's all sort of truths that have been there all the time, and they're not fixed truths forever, but they're sort of rules for life. So there's truth, I think, is always flexible, and now people are discovering, the Rand Corporation has discovered that it's a flexible thing, and that's why the report was written. Because
to me, it's from the perspective of a lot sort of a logical positivism approach here. I mean, Aristotle said that axioms are not based upon empirical observation. The axioms are before the observations, and they guide the observations. So this sort of perspective you see in the Rand report is embracing the idea that all these empirical facts, if we get enough of them, they will build up the proper set of values to guide society. So it's kind of baked in from the very beginning what the axioms should be. They should be these scientific facts. And if we all get on board with that, then we'll have a cohesive society, and we won't have the sort of disorder that they're afraid of, whatever that may be. That's their notion of truth, even though they keep referring to facts. But overall, that's their idea of truth.
And there's something else that I think is missing in the report, although I didn't read every letter of it, but I sort of didn't have the time for that. But that truth has always been sort of I forgot what I'm going to say. Sorry, you have to cut this out. I forgot what I was saying. Sorry.
Well, I thought it was interesting what you said because that is sort of what the report also points out, that things like when to sow your seeds and when to milk your cow and when to make your cheese and all of these things. These are truths into to the extent, to the ordinary man, to the extent that they are the immediacy of his life, and he can speak from experience, and he would be in his place to express his opinion on these things because he knows something about them. But now with the explosion of social media, we have just this deluge of opinion of people who have
Mhm.
not done their due diligence. They do not know what they are talking about, and we cannot assert if the one expressing online their opinion is in any way or shape in a position to speak with authority about the things that he is speaking about. And that is the great problem. That's why in our pre-discussion I mentioned Ortega y Gasset. It is a phenomenon of the rise of the mass man, the uncultivated man that thinks he is a man of the world, and he has opinions, and therefore he has the right to speak on everything that comes to pass.
Mhm. I was trying to hint. So now, no, remember, I'm trying to hint at the fact that neoliberalism or neoliberal capitalism has destroyed so much, and also truth, because they cite reports by corporations and other businesses, and what we know from the pharmaceutical industry and from others, also other industries, is that they give an order. So they ask scientists or scholars to do some sort of research, and they get the kind of results they want. And if they don't get the report that they need for their production lines or whatever, they don't pay. So you have to. So there's this whole system has been institutionalized that experts, so-called experts, and scientists and scholars and people knowledgeable with knowledge about a certain topic,
Yeah.
that they dance to the tune that's played to them.
Yes.
That's the system that we're living in, and that has become so institutionalized in the United States and in Europe under neoliberalism that sort of it's difficult for people like in the Rand Corporation to distinguish what is truth and what is not true. So I think.
I would say these statements like one should have faith in vaccines blur the lines between science and religion. Because
Mm-hmm.
what is the expectation from a statement like that is you consider yourself the average. There are many people who have reactions to vaccines, but you should just pretend that might not be you. Just go along with it. And that is what they call, believing in science or following the science, these expressions they invent. Just take yourself as a person, as an individual person out of the equation and consider yourself the average because that's what's the greater good. It's sort of the utopian speech.
Well, it's true what you say, but then what they say is you have to follow the science or believe in science, is that they imply that science is what most scientists in a certain field think or believe. That is not
Right.
science. Science is hard proof, and there's so little hard proof in anything, and that's what most people think. Well, climate science or whatever, and the COVID thing. So truth is being destroyed from by the very people that Rand people work for. I mean,
I mean,
basically.
I think all real scientists know that each proposition is provisional, so it's subject to change.
Yes.
Karl Popper said it's what cannot yet be disconfirmed, but it will
Full
be eventually.
viability.
It will
Yes.
be eventually. But we're
Uh,
That's
supposed to
Kuhn's
just
paradigm.
believe
Yes. Mm-hmm.
in,
Yes.
in the
Yes, it's
current one. So it's
yeah, it's falsifiability. We see the sun rising every day and setting every day, but one day it might not, and disproving our entire theory that it always rises and falls. That's the entire theory of falsifiability, and that's why science is never settled, because we can always come across new information that disproves our previous theories. Um,
Yes.
right.
We should. Yes.
but of course the report makes a distinction between truth and science, or fact and science. But I think that what was I going to say? I forgot my train of thought. Uh,
Happens.
Yeah, I was going to comment on something you guys said, but yeah.
Okay, it happens. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
any other remarks? Oh yeah,
Well,
I remember what I was trying to say. So of course, throughout of history, just as Charles rightly said, it has been myth and different things than facts and science that have given meaning to our societies, as Eliade would call the axis mundi. Of course, it is this immutable center around which we constructed ourselves and our societies. And one could only understand oneself if one had an axis mundi. How are you going to place the world and all of the events and things in it if there is not a center to which you can orient everything?
it's Aristotle. Yes, basically.
Also Aristotle, and
Yeah.
but he didn't call it the axis mundi. That comes from Eliade. But I think when we say there isn't necessarily a fixed truth, what comes to mind is that all of the great thinkers of history basically came to the same conclusion, that there is a foundation to reality that must be truthful. Plotinus called it the one. Aristotle called it I forgot. But all of the great thinkers, Hegel, Heidegger, all of them said that there must be something that is at the foundation of our reality that must be truthful. Otherwise, we would have simply pure chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of facts out there. So to believe that we can just base our society on facts is sort of dishonest, because no individual can be aware of even a small percentage of all scientific facts. But a person can be aware of most of the traditions, and the traditions determine which facts are focused on. But that's kind of left out of this sort of logical positivist scientific thinking that we get in reports like this.
Yes. And
It's
fact
very naive, I thought. A very naive report.
It is. I
Endearing
mean,
also.
it's a good writers, but yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I've only read a small portion of it.
But it's also endearing, sort of really charming that they should come up with a topic like this in this day and age, I think.
well,
Yeah, it is kind of charming.
the irony is that I actually agree with a lot that the report says in terms of the great masses of people have no place expressing their uneducated opinions everywhere. So to that, I must agree. But
But I would say in response to that it's the experts who have more pride in thinking that they know what they know is true, not just the common man. The common man has opinions, but I mean, I believe that still the average person will listen to other opinions, unless it's about Trump, of course. But on other things, they will. But sometimes experts, they've been writing dozens of essays for 40 years or something like that, and at a certain point, they think that they're the pinnacle of that field. And it's hard for them. I mean, we see this over and over again, where they'll discount evidence. Like what's the purpose of the pyramids in Giza, or what's the oldest megalithic architecture? People have very strong opinions about that who are true experts in the field.
Well, the German word for that is Fachidioot. Like, isn't
Is
it?
that right?
That's
I don't know that one.
Fachidioot. Yeah.
I know German's good about just adding another word to one
Yes.
word to make it a new word.
Yeah, that's what the Dutch also can be. English separated with a little space, but it's the same system basically. Sort of.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm not a libertarian in any way, shape, or form, but one of my favorite economists is Thomas Sowell, and he wrote a book called Intellectuals and Society, and he states exactly this, that people who have a university degree or a PhD tend to think that because they have a PhD in a very narrow subject, they get to express their opinions on all of the subject because they have a PhD, which is, of course,
Right.
very, very, very narrow, very far from the truth.
And this goes back to Socrates, actually. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
Socrates talked about,
Yes,
the shoemaker thinks he can give his opinion on art just as well as the artist.
exactly. But to say that we do not have experts is, of course, a step too far. There are people who are absolutely masters in their field, and who also refrain from commenting on different things. I also think, one of the great examples is, for instance, Noam Chomsky, who is a linguist, but can't seem to shut up about virtually every topic that he comes across. And how much value should be attached to the opinion of somebody who isn't educated in those fields? With the onset of the entire climate debate, we see climate science used to be very fringe. There were only a handful of climate scientists because there wasn't any money floating around. And you have this guy, William Happer, I believe he's already 90 years old or older, very knowledgeable about climate, but simply doesn't speak about anything else because he says, I don't know anything other. I've done climate science my whole life. So we do have real experts, but it is, of course, these experts that get weaponized by the grand narratives that our government wants us to believe, during COVID and vaccines and climate change and all of that.
But a lot of discoveries come from non-experts throughout history. We have to keep that in mind.
Yes.
Yes. If it's true what history tells us.
Oh, true. That was the other subject, right? That we may have considered.
Chronology criticism.
Right. Yes. The older I get, the less certain I am of all these historical facts. It's very difficult to establish a historical fact. Very difficult.
Again, to Socrates, that is one of the wisest things he said, is I know that I do not know. And I think that's a very healthy position to have, to accept that you know very little, at least as certainty.
Yes.
And I think that generalists make connections that specialists don't. So maybe not just the average person, but a generalist who dabbles in a lot of fields will see things that the specialist will not. So he needs to be listened to also.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it's a bit like medicine. That if you these days, most doctors are specialists. So if your knee hurts or whatever, your shoulder, you go to the specialist, and he doesn't look at you, or she, I must say, he or she these days. He looks at your shoulder or your knee. That's what they see. Yes. They don't see anything else. Whereas in a good doctor should look at the whole person. It should have a holistic approach. Should look at how a person speaks, what words he uses, how he dresses, where he lives, how he moves. That will help him analyze the person and make his diagnosis. If you just look at the small detail of the man's or woman's problem, you get nowhere. And that's one of the reasons why medicine today is in such a mess, because there are no more holistic doctors anymore. That's why.
It's sort of the assembly line approach, interchangeable parts. Let's just look at this part on this line, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And in history, our greatest men who were considered great scientists or great sages or men of great wisdom were never scientists in a narrow field. I mean, Aristotle, God knows what he already well, it's just impossible to name what things he did. He named plants, he came up with philosophies, he contemplated the vastness of the universe and the smallest details of our reality. And you had Pythagoras, who was a great mathematician, but was also a mystic, and they were expert in many fields. And this is completely contrary to what we have today.
And I would say on that point that the over-specialization in philosophy makes those individuals not philosophers, because a philosopher has to look at the big picture. If you're just focused on, like some branch in analytic metaphysics, I have doubts as to whether you're really a philosopher anymore. If you're just, which articles you're going to read every day, you kind of have this backlog of things you need to keep up with in your field. You're not really looking at the world. You're looking at the research, in quotes. You know what I mean? You have it kind of, your work is cut out for you. That's not Thales falling down the well when he's looking at the stars,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
the first, traditionally the first Western philosopher.
Well, basically, they said that studying philosophy doesn't make you a philosopher.
No.
Doesn't mean what? Oh, right.
Doesn't make you a philosopher. It sort of is, if you're a philosopher, you don't have to study philosophy to be a philosopher, basically, right?
Yeah, I think a philosopher can be someone who's never read any philosophy,
Right. Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
someone who reads articles every day is not necessarily a philosopher.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, to a certain extent, a bricklayer or a carpenter has done more for the world than some philosophers in their entire life, because they do
Definitely.
is sit in dusty back rooms and have endless discussions about the minutiae of two competing philosophies that are very, very similar, but just use a little bit of different terminology. So that is, of course, yeah, the vast, whatever academic philosophers engage in is much of that very, very technical debate. And what we need is philosophy and something that grounds morality and truth, basically, that is easily to conceptualize for the great masses, because the fact that we need to remoralize and re-truth our societies is paramount to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. I agree.
I agree. Again, that goes back to myth versus facts, in my opinion, because there's an endless number of facts.
Yeah.
So which group of facts are we going to have the general population focus on? I
Well,
don't see an answer to that.
every society has its founding myth, and perhaps it is time to reinvent our own founding myth.
But that's a question.
Mhm.
Can we invent a myth? Because most of the greats like Eliade, you mentioned, myth is organic. It's not
Yeah.
something we can create mechanically. So,
But we do have an
Well,
enormous history to look back on.
mm,
Yes, Hans?
I think even that would be I think not completely true, because I think there are national myths, and they often go back into the mist of times as far as the sort of origins. But there are also modern myths about space exploration, or about political myths that about, like the state of Israel. So, I mean, it's totally sort of invented, and inventions can turn into sort of conscious inventions can easily turn into myths, and the myth about the history of flying or flight. That's also pure mythology, basically. If you look at it, basically from a historian's point of view, most of it, as it is sold to the public, is mythology, and it's modern mythology. And the same goes for other histories that are written today about other topics or about other fields, other countries. Very often, it's a kind of mythology, because because in history it's very difficult to get hard facts that are sort of immovable and are sort of certainly truth. Very difficult. So of necessity, history, much of history is kind of mythology, dressed up as history. So
people often talk about how World War II is sort of a mythological event, the way people
exactly.
perceive it.
Yes.
How much was it formulated to be mythological, and how much of that is natural? Is a question for me.
That's difficult to say. That's a good question, but
I think we must
difficult to answer that.
We must distinguish between myth and fable, of course, and those are not the same things.
Yeah, but fables can mutate or transform into myths. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think a myth is based on a lot of passion and strife and fire and blood over maybe generations, and so you can see how there's a natural creation of mythology from World War II alongside the artificial part of it, the artificial creation.
Yes.
All right. So
indeed.
We have less than 1 minute of recording left. Should we continue another 40-minute session, or do you think that we have said enough about the topic for tonight?
I think we've said enough about the topic.
Right.
We've
I agree.
covered it all.
Fine. Then
I really enjoyed it.
Yes. Thank you, audience, for watching our latest episode of Polaris, and we will see you next time.